Hi, I'm Mike Dilk and you're listening to the Relax Back UK show, the show that explores all kinds of health topics relevant to you, your family and your friends. Each week I talk to expert guests from a range of backgrounds to inform and entertain you. So please do join the Relax Back UK family and stay tuned.
Thank you for joining me, Mike Dilk, on the Relax Back UK show this week. Now, I love honey, and that is what the show this week is all about. More specifically, Manuka honey. My guest is Tony Wright, CEO of the unique Manuka Factor Honey Association, and we cover how Manuka honey has some curative properties.
The reason a lot of wounds don't heal is because they are chronically inflamed. And that's the key. The key outcome there was understanding how Manuka honey can potentially interact with inflammation systems. And this is where it gets really interesting at a broader consumer benefits side of things, because a lot of the modern day issues that we have all come from oxidative stress and inflammation.
And of course, it tastes great. We had a taste test. You can hear me munching. Sorry about that.
When you're tasting the Manuka, you'll probably pick up more caramel notes, maybe a bit of a tang.
Okay.
Ironically, it can have a slight sort of bitterness to it, even though it's still sweet. And that's you are literally tasting the good stuff in it.
Please do stay tuned for a fascinating show about Manuka honey.
This show is cool!
I met my guest in a studio in London, but he travelled all the way from New Zealand. He's Tony Wright, CEO of the unique Manuka Factor Honey Association. My first question to him was, what actually is that organisation, and can we refer to it in a more succinct way?
So we generally just refer to it as the UMF Honey Association. The UMF Honey Association
That's better. We're going to run with that. Okay,
right. So I was going to give you a little background.
Please do.
Just so that you and the listeners understand what UMF's all about. So just over 25 years ago, there was a group of beekeepers that were producing Manuka honey, and this was around when Manuka was just becoming famous, and they recognised the need back then to establish standards to protect consumers to ensure that they were getting an authentic product. And so the UMF Honey Association came into being for the purpose of establishing standards to protect the consumer, and that's the core of our purpose today.
Okay, so Manuka honey is from New Zealand. I notice you pronounce it slightly differently.
Yeah, so the A has a macron over it. In some spellings, it can have two A's. The idea is that you make the A longer, so it's Manuka.
Okay, all right. I'm going to try and do that. I might slip into my Southern English Manuka every so often, so apologies in advance. So is this Manuka honey from a specific part of New Zealand?
So the tree Manuka grows throughout New Zealand. It's from the species known in Latin as Leptospermum scoparium. I won't ask you to spell that, but that's what it's known as throughout New Zealand. It's found in both North Island, South Island, and most of the beekeeping operations harvesting Manuka honey are centred around the North Island. If people are familiar with New Zealand, but yeah, it's produced across New Zealand.
All right. And so is this tree, is it like a big, glorious, wonderful tree or just a bit of a bush, essentially?
It's not terribly spectacular, except when you see it flowering. It is usually a medium-sized bush. It can grow to tree-sized. It sort of tops out at about 5 metres. When you see it flowering, though, and en masse, it's quite spectacular. It actually looks like snow. It looks like valleys or hills covered in snow because it's just so dense. The white flowers across the hillside, it's quite spectacular when it's all going off at the same time.
Okay. And these trees are all kind of wild, natural, or are they cultivated to help with the production of honey?
There's a bit of a mixture. The industry grew up with it being entirely harvesting off areas where there was wild Manuka growing. There has been an increase in the amount of cultivated Manuka, but it's all based on wild sourced strains.
So it's the same stuff. It's not inferior.
Yeah. It's the same stuff. So it's no different to what was growing in the wild. But there has been some intelligence going into the selection of it so that it produces better honey, but it's all the same plant.
Okay. All right. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the media about how wonderful this honey is. It can cure all kinds of stuff and, not quite if you have it on your toast every morning, you live forever. But there's research gone into what it can do for you as well. So I'm thinking to start, it might be useful if you can just outline some of the work that's happening or some of the work that has happened to really kind of nail down what it's good for and why.
Yeah, well, I think we'll go back in history a little bit just to provide the full context. So the plant itself was recognised by Maori who first went to New Zealand, probably about 1,000 years ago. So they identified the value of the plant themselves for therapeutic purposes. And then when the bees that were used for beekeeping, which came from Europe, when they arrived in 1839, to be precise, the beekeeping industry and the honey production industry, if you like, had its genesis. And
so were bees not indigenous to New Zealand?
There are native bees in New Zealand, like there is native bees in a lot of places around the world, but they don't produce a honey crop. They tend to be less social, so they tend to be more solitary insects rather than the social insects, the social insect species that you get with the honeybee populations.
So was this part of the drive to make Europeans feel more at home?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it was like bringing out cows and sheep, and bees were part of the mix because obviously Europeans wanted to recreate home. So
because there's been real problems with like invasive species, hasn't there? Certainly in Australia, I can imagine in New Zealand as well.
So fortunately, bees are not a problem species, but there's certainly been a few other mistakes made with introducing other European species into the landscape.
Okay, interesting. So, all right, I interrupted a little bit there. You were telling us the story
of
that's
all right.
Some of the science.
So once beekeeping got established in New Zealand, then Manuka honey was able to start to be produced, and it wasn't really well recognised and not even really well known, I would say, outside of beekeeping. And beekeepers themselves weren't really that keen on it because it's actually quite a difficult honey to extract out of the frames. So when bees collect honey and they put it into the honeycomb, that's done in a frame system, and the extraction of the honey is done by spinning it out usually. And it's quite a thick honey, and it's called its property is called thixotropic. It's a thick jelly-like honey, so it needs to be agitated. Right. So beekeepers.
That means when you stir it, it gets more solid. Isn't that thixotropic?
It's a semi-solid until you stir it, and then it becomes liquid.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I something like that.
I got it the wrong way around, I think.
You may be right. I may be wrong. Actually, I'm not. Let's call it a truce. Anyway, the beekeepers didn't really like it because it was difficult to extract.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really valued that much. And then fast forward quite a few years, and it was in the 1980s that a scientist based at the University of Waikato started to look quite intently at honeys, and in particular, he was looking at the antibacterial properties of honey because he had an interest in how they could be used in therapeutic situations, and in particular wound care. And there's been a long history of honey being used in wound care through ancient civilizations. The Egyptians used it. The Greeks used it. It's been quite well known, and he was really looking at how could we understand what the potential of this is a bit further. So he started looking into it, and he got some really surprising results looking at Manuka. It had this additional antibacterial property that was superior to any of the other honeys that he was looking at. And what that turned into was the recognition of its potential value for treating wounds, particularly wounds that get infected. And so what came of that was this revolution around honey being used as a wound care.
A care? I don't know what that
wound
word
care,
is.
sorry, the accent. Wound care. So treating wounds.
Okay.
Yes.
Care. Right. Sorry.
Yes, there you go.
God, I need to get up to speed here.
I should write it down for you. So he got quite into that, and the observation when it started to get used clinically was that these wounds that weren't healing would heal quite quickly using Manuka honey.
So this is like smearing the honey on. you're not eating the honey. It's
No,
not
no,
a spoonful of medicine.
That's right. So this was all being done on external wounds, so
Right.
you could see what was going on. Absolutely. And so the observation was that Manuka honey was really effective in treating these wounds. But they realised that there must be more than just the antibacterial properties of the honey at play here, because some of these wounds weren't necessarily infected, but they were still healing a lot faster.
Okay.
And that triggered a whole lot of intelligent thought about things like, well, what's going on to stimulate the immune system? What's going on to manage and regulate inflammation? Because the reason a lot of wounds don't heal is because they are chronically inflamed. And that's the key. The key outcome there was understanding how Manuka honey can potentially interact with inflammation systems. And this is where it gets really interesting at a broader consumer benefits side of things, because a lot of the modern day issues that we have all come from oxidative stress and inflammation, including issues around gut health, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases, asthma. There's a whole raft of things that all come back to inflammation. And so it's interesting when you look at natural products that would have been always part of our diet when we had a more natural diet. And we would have had all of these plant compounds in our diet naturally from the plants that we would eat. And we've kind of moved away a little bit from that as a consequence of being more civilized. So if you think about the role that all these plant compounds have in managing things like inflammation, we then have the opportunity to say, well, what's in Manuka honey? And it turns out that a lot of these plant compounds that you would see in other natural products are in Manuka honey as well.
Right. Let me just ask you a question there, interrupt a bit. So there's a big difference between like rubbing something on that promotes healing and potentially works antibacterially onto a wound and helping with inflammation. There's a big difference there to applying it directly than eating it, taking it, and that helping with inflammation, because it goes through your digestive system, and there's a few barriers to get to where it's meant to help on the inflammation. I'm assuming that kind of thing has been looked at.
Yeah, it's almost like the same thing inside out, though, isn't it? Because the honey is coming into contact with the microbiome, which is a big part of the immune system, which has a big impact on inflammation, and it's also able to come in direct contact with the gut wall itself. So when you're thinking about digestive health outcomes, it's actually quite reasonable to then say, well, the external wound environment or the external wound model is almost a visible model of what could be happening internally. The internal situation is very hard to study, but the clues that we're getting from the studies that are being done is pointing to some combination of effect along these lines, which is actually quite exciting.
Yeah. Now, at this point, I always really ask my guests very often, okay, so are there peer-reviewed, published papers in existence? And if people are kind of interested, where can they get to see them? So
there is a lot of published. There is at least 500 peer-reviewed, published research papers on Manuka honey.
Okay, so this is mainstream stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing. There's nothing shoddy about the science that's been done on Manuka honey over the last 40 years. There is a huge amount of early work which is focused on wound care, and more the focus has been shifting toward how does this now translate into the other things that I was talking about.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Now, there's a major problem. One thing you mentioned was antibacterial properties. Now, there's a major problem worldwide with antibiotics that aren't actually working quite as well as they were because the antibiotic resistance. So is there potential, or is any work happening at the minute where Manuka honey might be useful in helping with that?
Yeah, and that's already been studied. There are actually already published papers that...
I've not had a novel thought on anything yet, so there's no reason why I should start now.
Yeah, so there's already published papers showing how some of the pathogen isolates that come out of hospitals in particular, MRSA, for example, which you've probably heard of, responds really well to Manuka honey. So some of these issues that they see in wounds that won't heal because there are pathogens that are antibiotic resistant. They're not resistant to Manuka honey.
Right.
In fact, I don't think we've ever seen a situation where resistance has been able to be created in any pathogen to Manuka honey. And the reason for that is because it's acting on so many different aspects that it's impossible. Well, I guess it's not impossible, but it's very difficult for a pathogen to develop resistance when there are multiple things going on that are affecting the pathogen itself. So it doesn't overcome a single point of defense. It's having to overcome multiple points of defense, which is why the organism doesn't develop resistance.
Sure, no, I get it. All right, so we've touched on the science a little bit, and if people are interested in that, they can go off and find papers. I'm sure there's some directions on that on your website, and we can mention that later. But the actual stuff itself, what is special with presumably the nectar in these plants? There must be something in it that makes it different to all the other honeys in the world.
Absolutely. So in a piece of research that the UMF Honey Association did some years ago, we started to look at the detail of the components that are in Manuka honey relative to other honey types. Yeah. And in that study, we identified over 2,000 components in Manuka honey. And for relativity, a honey like clover has around 90 to 100 different components in it. So the honey coming out of the Manuka nectar is vastly more complex. And a lot of that complexity is the presence of compounds which are already known through other studies to be these phenolic compounds, which are known to have anti-inflammatory effects or to have positive benefits to consumers based on work either done directly on the honey itself or other products that have these compounds in it. So what makes the nectar special is that for some reason Manuka is able to produce a nectar that contains a vast amount of complex beneficial compounds for humans. Why did it do that? Well, we don't know, but did it co-evolve with a pollinator that there was a codependency? Who knows? But we get the benefit from it. And
right.
But the key thing here is making sure that you've actually got the authenticity of source.
Okay, so I was going to ask a basic question about that because you've got the bees buzzing around on these Manuka trees. Presumably, there's plenty of other flowers and plants around. So how do you know that these bees have spent all their time or the bulk of their time on the Manuka trees that we're interested in?
So there's a bit of craft there from the beekeepers because they become very good at getting the bees up to speed on. They might get the bees up to a highly productive state on another nectar source, and then when they've got a very strong hive and the Manuka's flowering, they can put all of those bees into that place.
Oh, so they move the hives?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And they can take out any other nectar sources that are in the hive. So they've got a clean hive. A lot of busy bees, a big population of bees ready to go.
Yeah.
Let them at it, and they will go for whatever is the most efficient nectar source. Because bees are ruthlessly efficient with their time and energy. They don't waste time if they don't.
I like that phrase, ruthlessly efficient. I wish I could be ruthlessly efficient with some things. My wife would love it, I think. But anyway, that's my problem.
Yeah.
Let's put that to one side.
And because it's quite a short flowering window for Manuka. It varies depending where you are, but it could be as short as 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so the beekeeper has then got to keep an eye on the conditions and swoop back in, shut the hives off, get them back out again, and harvest the honey. Because otherwise, the bees can, if you don't take them off at that point, they'll go and find another nectar source.
Yeah.
So there is certainly a lot of operational skill required from the beekeeping point of view to make sure that you are getting an authentic Manuka honey. But then we also, I guess to your point, how do you know that they've done that? So there's the craft of getting that right from a timing point of view, but then there's the verification, which
yes, I wanted to ask you about that. How do you know? You get a load of honey out the hive.
Yes.
What do you test it or
Absolutely.
verify it in some way?
That's exactly what we do. So we are fortunate in New Zealand to we actually have a regulatory definition which our government assisted us with, So we actually have a regulatory standard for Manuka honey. So honey to be called Manuka has to meet this regulatory definition. And then on top of that, the UMF Honey Association does its own quality assessments to verify that the product's of a suitable standard as well. So there's a lot of testing and verification that goes into authenticating that the beekeeper got it right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the promise that comes through, as I said at the start, from the UMF Honey Association being set up in the first place to give consumers confidence that they're getting an authentic product.
Right. Now, we've got a jar here, and it's got the sign UMF on it. So you're saying that actually that is the thing to look for. If you're going to buy some Manuka honey, I'm saying it in the English way now, apologies for that. If you're going to buy some of this, you really need to look for this UMF stamp sign.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So when you see the UMF mark on a jar of honey, you know that it's gone through our quality assurance program, and so we are verifying that the beekeeper got it right, that the product is labelled correctly, and that the product in the jar is going to be true to label for the stated shelf life of the product.
All right. So within that, do you get different grades? So this jar I'm looking at is labelled UMF 15 plus.
Yep. So this is the potency of the bioactives that are in there. So the plants express compounds at different rates. So even though it's Manuka honey, the potency can vary for reasons of climate, environment, sunshine. We don't really know why it all varies, but it does. And that's the point of the grading system there, is to give consumers a means of navigating the potency of the honey. And that goes through into the choices then that a consumer would make about, well, where do I want to invest my money in buying Manuka honey? Do I want a really strong, potent grade of Manuka honey to treat a particular concern that I've got right now? Or do I want something with a lower potency that I'd take just as part of my normal daily routine?
So what does it go up to? As I said, this one's labelled 15 plus.
Yeah, typically it ranges usually 5 to 20. There's some exceptional grades that get up closer to 30, which are pretty rare. But mainstream is in the sort of 10 to 15 range, which is what most consumers would buy.
Right, okay. Now, we've spoken a lot about honey, where it comes from and everything, but let's get down to basics. Does it taste nice?
Well, before we get to that, we'll just go back to this point about all the rich stuff that's in it, because I want you to think about this when you're tasting it. So recent research that came out last year was comparing our authentic New Zealand Manuka honey to Manuka honey that's been sourced from elsewhere. And what that research showed, so this was research that came out from one of our Crown.
When you say elsewhere, in other countries, are there Manuka trees in other parts of the world?
There are producers who would claim that they have it, right. And we contest that. We say, well, that's not right, and I'll go on to explain why we think that's the case. So the research that came out recently was around honey that was sourced from Australia versus honey sourced from New Zealand. And they looked at the detailed composition of those two sets of honey. There was about 35 samples in each side of this test. So 70 samples all up. And what they looked at was they looked at the detailed composition of everything that was in them. And across the hundreds of compounds that they were able to identify, 50% of the compounds varied in composition between honey that was produced and called Manuka in Australia and honey that was produced and called Manuka in New Zealand. So the differences are massive. And what that means is, compositionally, this product that you're seeing here in front of you is completely compositionally different to products that are being called Manuka honey in another country. Now, you think about the consequences of what we talked about before, which is, if you are taking this as a natural health product and it's having a multifaceted impact on things like inflammation, you don't want to be fiddling around with that and potentially not getting the benefit from it because you're missing the compositional complexity that was in the authentic product. And so it's really important that in products like this, we don't reduce them down to measuring single things and thinking that that's a substitute for appreciating the complexity of it. And so that's why I wanted to pause you before you taste it, so that you can, when you're tasting this, you can think about the complexity of, because I'm not sure, what was the other honey that you've got there?
Okay, so it's runny honey that I bought at my local supermarket for less than £1.50, and I just squirged it on.
All right, well, shall we have a crack at this?
Absolutely. So I'll just describe what I've done. So look, I've got a piece of bread, and I've spooned some of your honey on it, and I also squirged some of the runny honey on a piece. Now, I can see a difference straight away. While we've been chatting, it's been sitting here, and the honey that I brought and squeezed on is practically disappeared into the bread completely, and your honey is kind of sitting on top. So there's a difference.
Yeah, so there's a good reason.
Consistency
so
already.
I'll explain why that's happened. So this soggy mess over here that you've bought is...
I was really worried about getting honey on some of this equipment, actually. I was scared. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
So the soggy mess you've got over here is because this is completely liquid honey, and this is pretty normal. This is what a lot of honey produced around the world looks like. What we pretty much always do in New Zealand with Manuka honey is we what we call it is we cream it. And what that is it's very finely crystallized, and it thickens the texture up. It actually improves the flavour, and it improves the mouthfeel. So you'll appreciate that, I think, when you've got your soggy bit of bread and your not so soggy bit of bread. But well, shall we?
Yeah, and just so, should I be kind of looking for anything else as I taste it?
Well, shall we start with the? We'll start with the soggy one.
Yeah, all right.
And I think what you'll find, and I'm guessing, what you'll find is that it's going to be pretty sweet and not a lot of complexity going on. You'll probably taste the bread more than the honey.
So, first of all, I love honey, okay? And I'm used to having this kind of liquidy stuff, and it has become a soggy mess, as you described. But it's exactly as I would expect. It is quite sweet. I am getting a lot of the bread, but I like it. You know, it's what I'm used to, and I like it. So, but I'm quite excited to try this one as well.
So what I'll prompt you with, so that you probably appreciate it a bit more, is when you're tasting the Manuka, you'll probably pick up more caramel notes, maybe a bit of a tang.
Okay.
Ironically, it can have a slight sort of bitterness to it, even though it's still sweet. And that's you are literally tasting the good stuff in it.
All right, I'm going for it.
So let's go for this one.
All right. So first of all, it's very different. It's I would say it's much more intense. Actually, there's a lot more flavour, and it just keeps on going a little bit. Actually, it's very different, and really, to be honest, it's like two different things. There's no comparison between the two.
No, not at all. So
I need to put that down because I'll finish it after the show. It's magnificent, actually. It
is.
And you said there's you might pick up on a little bit of bitterness. So I am getting that now as a slight aftertaste. It's not unpleasant, but it's definitely there.
And that is you are literally tasting all of those bioactive compounds that are in the honey.
Very nice. All right, I'm glad we did the taste test because, to be honest, up to this point I was kind of thinking, well, honey's honey. But no, it's not. It's really not. Just from that little taste, I can figure that out. All right, so let's go on a little bit. You're talking about this honey. Presumably worldwide, not that much of it is made. You know, it must, because it's coming from New Zealand in particular. So is it a scarce commodity? Does it have a rarity value?
Well, it certainly does. It's relatively rare when you think about other honey producing countries. I think the largest honey producing country is China, and they produce, I think they export something like 400,000 tonnes of honey a year. A lot of it makes its way here. It's probably that one, actually. Compared to that, so New Zealand's producing around 6,000 tonnes of Manuka. So it's relatively small amount, and 6,000 tonnes still sounds like quite a lot of honey, doesn't it?
I was just thinking, how many jars is that?
It's
a lot of honey.
It's still quite a lot of jars, yes. But when you think about how big the world is and how big the honey consumption market is, it literally is a drop in the bucket.
Certainly, but so because it's relatively scarce and it tastes lovely and does have these other properties, is there a price to go with that? Because if something's scarce, often the price is a little bit more.
Yeah, there certainly is. And what you're paying for is, as I said, the operational complexity. The beekeeper is often focused on only producing Manuka honey. So they will run costs for their whole operation on the hope that one time of the year they will be able to get their hives in the right place at the right time to secure a Manuka crop. Mm-hmm. And that's what they'll earn their income off. So when you think about that, running your entire business for the hope that you've got 2 to 4 weeks of producing a product at the end of it, there's a lot of cost that operation has to bear.
And there's some risk as well.
Oh, absolutely, because in that time, unfortunately, New Zealand's probably a bit like the UK in that sense, that it seems to rain an awful lot. And it
unpredictable weather, you're saying?
Well, yes, and it always seems to coincide with when flowering occurs, so it is a bit of a lottery at times. The other thing to think about too is, as we've explained, with the health benefits associated with Manuka honey, we kind of stop thinking of it as honey. Of course, it is honey, and thinking of it more as this is a natural health product, and so the price should be related to the benefits that it's providing, as opposed to comparing it strictly to other honeys. So, is it expensive? I don't think so when you compare it to the value of other natural health products.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. So, I think that's fair. I want to go back to something which maybe I should have asked nearer the start. You did touch on it, but I'm kind of interested in it. Is there a history of real indigenous use in New Zealand?
Yeah. So Maori identified value from the Manuka plant. So before the honeybee even arrived in New Zealand, there was.
So did they use like the Manuka plant? Did they, I don't know, make tea out of the leaves and stuff like that, and use it in different ways? Yeah,
there was various uses they had for it. I'm not an expert on what they did, but I know they used it for wound care. Interestingly,
right. Okay.
So there's a continuity, I suppose, of the benefit going from the tree all the way through to the honey. I've seen instances quoted where it was used for anti-inflammatory purposes, reducing fevers. So I think they were bang on with identifying its use, and so the plant itself translating into the nectar it produces, translating into the honey that it produces, those benefits being passed through into the honey.
Okay, would it be maybe more efficient if you're looking at wound healing to cut out the bees and take a load of leaves, scrunch them up and put them on a wound?
Well, possibly, but then it just wouldn't be the same, would it?
No. I mean, it wouldn't be the same to eat, that's for sure.
No,
yeah.
But also in a honey format, there are other benefits of the honey format, because honey itself, whether it's Manuka or not, has got properties that would promote wound healing because of it's a slightly acidic environment, which is good for wound healing. Honey produces a peroxide, which Manuka produces the peroxide as well, but it also has as I said, the non-peroxide activity. So honey itself is antibacterial. Manuka's particularly antibacterial. So the honey format itself is actually quite good as a wound care medium. And Manuka is obviously exceptional.
Okay, interesting. Now, so is it catching on? I mean, do us Brits like it?
Yes. Well, the UK was probably one of the very first export markets for Manuka honey, and has been a key market for a very long time.
Okay, and is it proving popular in other places around the world?
Oh, definitely. Yes. So the US has well and truly surpassed the UK as the number one market. So they take around 1,500 tonnes So that's quite a big share of the 6,000 tonnes is going to the US. Coming in at number 2, China. They're sitting around 1,000 tonnes, and then there's a little bit of vying for third place between the UK, Japan, and Australia. Ironically, which come in with some pretty respectable volumes as well.
And a fair bit of home use as well.
Yeah, but actually, like a lot of things that New Zealand produces, we export vastly more than we consume ourselves.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Mind you, it's a fairly small population.
Yes, well, exactly.
There's not many of you.
Well, that's right. We have a small population.
Although you still managed to beat us at rugby, but anyway, that's another story.
Well, yes, that's another story.
Yeah. Okay, so look, if people are listening to this and thinking, all right, so look, I'd like to find out a bit more about this honey, what it can do for me, how I can get it, and actually maybe look at some of the science. What are some good resources that people can look at?
So a good starting point, if you go to the UMF website, which is umf.org.nz, we have links on there to research and also some research summaries. But also, if you just type in Manuka honey research into a Google search, you'll have an enormous amount of material come up at you. So happy reading.
Okay, all right. Absolutely fascinating. This is a whole world of which essentially I knew nothing. So thank you very much indeed, Tony. Absolute pleasure to chat.
Thank you.
Many thanks to my guest on this week's show, and that was Tony Wright, CEO of the unique Manuka Factor Honey Association. Thank you to you for listening, and have a healthy week. Until next week.
Thanks for listening to the Relax Back UK show. Join me, Mike Dilk, again next week for more fascinating interviews and chat. If you're listening to the podcast version, please subscribe, like, and share it with your family and friends. And have a healthy week. Until next week.